Hello everyone. Sometimes it's really hard to say if it's the man behind the legend or the legend behind the man. But in any case, we're going to be talking about the products that this man has brought to us back in the 80s. And we're talking about Sir Clive Sinclair, a British entrepreneur and inventor that changed the computer industry as we knew it. And you know what? He really did, because he managed to introduce to the public the first home computer under £100, which made it affordable to everyone, so that everybody, in theory, can have a computer at home, could try coding ideas, how to learn basic and do basic programs and things, far from the applications the way we know applications today. But you could monitor your expenses for starters, or you can play games. The remarkable things are many on this machine. For example, available RAM memory was just 1 kilobyte. Imagine that. Just 1 kilobyte of RAM, 4 kilobytes of ROM, including the basic. And it comes, as you can see, in original packaging. This was taken from my personal collection for the needs of this video. We can find a leaflet here. Not everybody knew what the cursor is or how to syntax a program, right? So some introduction was needed at all times. And yeah, let's see how this computer looks like, how it used to be back in the 80s, and maybe we can understand why it was so successful. Oh, by the way, I think it was just 50,000 sold or something like this, but still it was a big hit, it was a big success, because computing back then was basic for business development and business stuff, accountants or you name it. The important thing is that this machine managed to get into the ordinary people's home, and many of us have started with this machine back in the day. As you can see, there is not a proper keyboard. It looks like a touch keyboard. It's not even that. It's just a membrane underneath that makes the contact, and whenever you press a key, you got the whole instruction on the screen, not letter by letter. We can see three mono jacks over there for communication with the tape recorder and the power. And yes, it was the day that computers still were made in England and not in Asia. The case is not great, although in good shape, but it's very cheap plastic. By getting older and older, gets yellow. It comes with manual for basic programming. It was a fully programmable machine, no doubt about that, but with limited characteristics. This is the power adapter for UK leads, and if I remember this right, it was 9 volts output. So you could hook it up onto your TV. It produces a UHF signal, channel 36, and you could start typing right on the spot. No booting devices back then, no operating system, no hard disk whatsoever. And all that you had to do. The other pair of cables could be used for connecting the computer to the cassette player, the recorder, so you can load or save your work or games. You can load your games and save your work, and for the most part it was like playing games again. um, and the manual is quite good. Everything you need to know is in on this manual. Back in the 80s, you couldn't ask for more, I guess. And it's quite concrete. I like that. It gives you the ability to start learning basic commands, how to print something on the screen, the keyboard layout, the instructions that every key can give you on the screen, how to put simple programs together, like enter a number, guess a number, enter your name, the guessing game, and printing on the screen, stuff like that. And as you can see, everything was from England. Everything came from England back in the day, and that was something that really made the British computer industry top of the lead back then. So yeah, this is the ZX80. Let's put it back. I know it was just a quick review, but I think we can move on to the next computer, which is waiting underneath this box. There's another box pretty much similar to this one, but with a logo outside, and this is the very next attempt, the next model that came out in the markets by Sir Clive. This logo indicates that this machine is in cooperation with Timex, and the model is called Timex 1000. But actually we're talking about Sinclair ZX81. The Timex 1000 machine, like this one, has been introduced to the United States, and the difference is that nothing is different as far as I can see for the power supply. The main difference was the RAM, the available RAM. This machine comes with 2 kilobytes instead of 1, because the British model, the British ZX81, used to have 1 kilobyte of RAM, like exactly like the ZX80. Of course, the other difference is the ROM, and that holds the BASIC, which in this case is not 4K anymore, but it's 8 kilobytes available, and this one was made in Portugal, as you can see, mainly for the US markets. Channel selector, ear, microphone, and 9-volt DC, and the classic RF modulator to give you the signal over your TV, and many papers, many things like warranty. You have to send it back to Little Rock, Arkansas, so that the guarantee remains valid for, I think it was a year. Yeah, still in original packaging. This is what I like. The service contract, everything has been taken care of, and this machine was a huge success. Needless to say, there is no color there is no sound, and the same um, was for the ZX80. No sound capability, no colors, just black and white characters. But this one has sold um, many hundreds of thousands of devices around the globe. And this here is a list of compatible models for the tape recorder you could be using back in the day. Of course, it's not complete, but that's what they have. Yeah, that's what they have been testing, I guess. But any decent mono cassette player would do the job. Again, the same pattern with leaflets and the guarantee and Q&As, how to start. It was a real blast back then, with games, magazines, listings of programs you could type on your own, and things you can buy, peripherals as well, and extra memory. Of course, this is important. With just 1 kilobyte of RAM, you have been very limited if you wanted to try something bigger than one screen of program that you came up with. If you wanted to play games or stuff, you needed to have the expansion for the memory, which gives us the massive 16 kilobytes, and it's either something you could be using on the ZX80, but also on the ZX81. Here is a note from the managing director and everything that comes into the package, and it gives you an idea of what other games and peripherals you can find out in the market, and yeah, to make your machine more robust and more powerful. Effectively, again from England, it was a great price reduction, as you can see. At some point, everything was there, everything you needed, and this is the RAM expansion I've been telling you about. 16 kilobytes of RAM. You can play decent games with this little fellow here, and it can also be fitted onto the ZX80 as well. Now, one other interesting thing, a pretty clever idea of Sir Clive's. Yeah, this is the ZX81, the original UK model with 1 kilobyte of RAM. Pretty much the same case, and yeah, pretty much the same computer, except the Timex has 2 kilobytes of RAM instead. Yeah, the clever idea was that you could buy these machines, and this has initially been introduced with the ZX80 in kit form, so you could build it by yourself at home. This one was made in the UK, and it was, if I remember this right, 20. The price was £20 cheaper, so it was about £80 back then. So, and here are some games and the file application available back in the day. The classic Space Invaders or Raiders, the file, and some other programs. So I think we're done with the presentation of the Sinclair 1000 or the ZX81. One other thing I wanted to mention about the tapes again is that these are, except of course for the artwork and the cover, regular tapes. So what we used to do back in the day was to take regular audio tapes and record, save, and store our games onto this regular audio tape. Nothing special with this. So this is how we used to do it. Of course, at the same time, you could find original tapes, titles, many of them out in the markets for £4 or something. I kept some ads from old magazines for my archives here. A real blast. Many titles released for the ZX81, and you could find it. You could find it everywhere in Britain and abroad. Quite a big success. And here is the cost for a built system, roughly £70 or £50 in kit form. You can take a pick. And this is the order form, I guess, for the games. You simply have to sum up the price and send it to them, and everything will be delivered right to your door. Now, forgive me, I have to go back to the ZX80 because I forgot really to show you something interesting here, which was the original ad for selling the machine for nearly £100, and all you could and you had to do is to complete this form, send it over to Sinclair, include a check, and everything will be delivered to you. That was quite interesting, and yeah, I thought you might wanted to see this. As Sinclair says, inside the day, it's gonna be like talking to an old friend. Quite catchy and clever ad from back in the day for the ZX80, and quite rare, I assume. So let's go back and continue with the rest of the machines and the rest of this review. So last but not least, we should probably take a look at the manual that comes with ZX81, which actually guides you through the basic functionality of the machine, how to set it up. And this is the second edition from 1982, and gives you an idea how to start with it. Introductory chapter 1, keyboard layout and the character set, more about basic and the guessing game. Here is a guessing game you can start. It's great to start with. The subroutines, how to use them, how to call them, and this is something interesting. What to do when the computer gets full. Remember, this machine has 1 or maximum of 2 kilobytes of RAM as it comes from the factory, and at some point it can get stuck. How interesting is this? The character set again, and something about how to use the variables and all that. So I guess, yeah, it was a very decent manual for the amateurs. Back in the day, you could immediately start typing, playing this guessing game, modifying code, and eventually creating your own code in no time, I guess. So let me put back everything together in the box. Inside the box we can find the regular power supply. We've seen that before. The manual is part of the other box, so I'm going to leave it outside because it's part of the British ZX81 and not this one. Another interesting accessory is the TV hookup cable for the UHF signal, and this switch, which was shipped only to the US. What it does is it takes the signal from the computer and the antenna from the old TV set, and you can switch between those two. TV operation or computer operation, so you don't have to uh, pull back the cable every time you need to use the computer, and it can be stuck at the back of the TV, and it stays there and gives you the ability um, to switch between the TV channels and the computer whenever you wish to play. Pretty smart, but obsolete, of course. That was the way UHF computer signals used to work, along with the old type of the TVs we used to have back in the 80s. So I guess we are done with this model, quite interesting model, again a milestone in computing history, and we should move to the legendary ZX Spectrum, which was the third model of the Sinclair series back in the beginning of the 80s, and it was the biggest success of all. ZX Spectrum introduced color and sound. Of course, it was primitive sound. It was just beeping. Just a beeper was there, but you could actually hear sound. Playing a game, you could write your program so that something like a song could be heard, or similar, or close. That was the initial screen. You should see when the computer was powered up, and this is the machine itself. Now, ZX Spectrum came in the 16K model initially, but right after that, the 48K was introduced. The spectrum on the side signifies that this machine can actually produce color, and it was remarkable. It was a big hit from the very beginning, with decent characteristics like the ULA, the better ULA. ZX81 used to have ULA as well. The color palette, the sound speaker, and decent memory. At last, you could play decent games. You could do useful stuff. You could run kind of applications, and as you can see, it is a better machine. You can tell immediately the difference. Several parts like the upper RAM, the lower RAM, the ULA are visible. You can see the ROM and the CPU, a big heatsink, and a decent keyboard. Decent keyboard compared to the ZX80 and the ZX81, of course, because this keyboard was not decent at all. Anyhow, this is the introductory tape. Horizons. Everything you needed to know was now on the screen, along with a game and a tutorial for typing basic stuff onto the machine, and it was quite useful. I remember playing with this many days before I can start writing my own programs and investigating the operation of the keys, the instructions, anything you needed to know was presented in there. And again, what makes a computer, a system, successful and popular? It's of course the software again, and we're talking about a blast, a real blast of software games coming from all over the world, and peripherals, interfaces for joysticks, you name it. Even microdrives have been introduced for the ZX Spectrum instead of regular tapes. And that was the time you can see the term plug and play was introduced back in '82. Is not something new. So everything was about the Spectrum. Offer special interfaces, new games coming out like every day. It was the absolute blast, the absolute success for Sir Clive. Revenue raised to millions of British pounds back then, and it was the biggest hits of all times. Now, ZX Spectrum was introduced back in 1982, and just because the keyboard was not great, let me put it this way, or not very reliable, the idea was to introduce the ZX Spectrum Plus back in '84 with a better keyboard, much better keyboard, and a bigger case, because the machine also suffered from high temperature. So, and a couple of other things like this smart feet for better position over your desk. Anyways, the idea was to get the brand new ZX Spectrum Plus, or you could just buy an upgrade, which was nothing else than the case itself. And this is something I have done back in '84. I still remember this was so easy to put it together. Just have to open the new case. Of course, screws and everything was included, and you had to open your old little Spectrum, get the motherboard out, and put it inside the new machine, and that was pretty much all you had to do. That simple. And then you could have your old case on the side like spare, and yeah, had to connect the membrane keyboard connectors, and that's it. You're done, almost there. So you had a brand new ZX Spectrum Plus. Pretty cool and easy, and if I remember this right, it was the price was reasonable as well. So another little thing, yeah, this screw in the center is not used anymore. Instead, you had to use the screws right at the bottom corners, and that was all to make the motherboard steady. Another thing is that little thing is that onto the electrolytic capacitors there was a reset button over there on the left. You had to solder, and instantly resets your machine. So that was all, and you're done in no time. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, Sir Clive's idea was always to get into the so-called business market. So he came up with QL, in other words, Quantum Leap. This computer here, which introduced the microdrives, as you can see, mini tapes, but with a very fast transfer rate, and apparently it was coming with 4 of those inside the package, introducing Abacus, this one as a spreadsheet solution, the word processor, which was called the QL, some business graphics, and a database system. So it was clearly a business machine, a remarkable machine to me, a fantastic machine, but came up in the markets in a hurry, let me put it this way, with several hardware problems and several workaround designs made in order to make it work back in '84. But it was a remarkable machine again, very well designed, with Sinclair Super Basic, which was great basic indeed. Um, you could do functions and procedures. You could do several stuff. With 128 kilobytes of RAM, 48 kilobytes of ROM, a couple of net ports at the back for the computer to be able to communicate with another computer. QDOS as a system that really allows you to do kind of multitasking. Back in '84 that was very impressive. RGB output, of course, and the 68,000 series Motorola CPU, although it wasn't the 68,000 classic CPU, it was the 68,008, which actually was 8-bit. Several interfaces and aftermarket peripherals have been introduced. This is the EEPROM programmer here on the side. You could have it connected on the system bus, and you could erase and write and rewrite and then create your own ROM or EEPROM chips at home, which was pretty impressive. And this is the donor board I keep, and you can see it is a pretty heavy populated PCB motherboard. Back there the net connectors, the RGB connectors, all the chips that are missing. Of course I have salvaged several stuff. The red socket holds the Motorola processor, a couple of ROM. The RAM is in place because it's not socket. The ports, the serial and the control ports back there, and the huge system bus on the side, useful for connecting peripherals. A pretty decent construction. I do believe it should have a better end. After all, I know there are many QL enthusiasts out there still these days, programming, developing stuff and working with the QL. It was a remarkable machine to me, as I said, and it was a pity that it wasn't successful in the market. But again, it wasn't the first attempt to reach the business users. It's a pity it didn't make it. Alright, let's move now to the very last original Sinclair machine released and ever made, and that is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 128K. This is the machine that is absolutely the last original Sinclair, because right after this machine, the design and the production of this machine, Amstrad, it was Amstrad that acquired Sinclair back in '86, and therefore there was no way Sir Clive could use the Sinclair logo anymore. This is a ZX Spectrum Plus with 128K of memory, but it's not only that, it has better sound with a Yamaha sound chip, if I remember this right. It has RGB output, and it was the best Spectrum ever made. It's quite rare, you cannot easily find it, because it was around that time there was this acquisition, and it was not very popular and very successful. Amstrad came up with ZX Spectrum Plus 2 with a built-in tape recorder on the side, and ZX Spectrum Plus 3 with a floppy drive on the side in 1987. So yeah, I still don't know if the man is behind the legend or the legend behind the man, but it was a wonderful, wonderful decade back then, Sir Clive, and we are all happy to have memories from that past. Thanks for watching, everyone. Consider subscribing. I'll be catching you with another video shortly.